The wedding day dawned with both suns shining brightly for the first time in months. The entire capital city buzzed with excitement and curiosity. Citizens lined the crystal streets, eager to witness the most unusual ceremony in their planet's history. Never before had a Zerathian princess married someone from another world. Zera stood in her private chambers, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece that blended traditions from both worlds. The flowing fabric shimmered with the traditional blue of Zerathian royalty, but it was cut in a style that honored human customs. Around her neck, she wore her grandmother's crystal necklace alongside a simple silver chain that Chen had crafted from metal salvaged from his crashed ship. "You look beautiful, sister," came a voice from the doorway. Zera turned to see Velana approaching, her expression softer than it had been in years. "I owe you an apology," Velana continued, her skin shifting to the pale blue of shame. "What I did, trying to poison Chen before the final trial, it was wrong. I was afraid that your success would somehow diminish my own worth." Zera studied her sister's face, seeing genuine regret there. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because watching him nearly die to save that child changed something in me," Velana admitted. "I realized that Chen didn't take anything away from our family. He added something we were missing, the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult." The sisters embraced for the first time in years, and Zera felt a weight lift from her heart. Having her family's support, even Velana's, meant more than she could have imagined. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Chen was having his own moment of reflection. His two surviving crew members, Rodriguez and Park, had been released and were helping him prepare for the ceremony. "You sure about this, Captain?" Rodriguez asked as he helped adjust Chen's formal jacket. "Once you're married to an alien princess, there's no going back to the quiet life," Chen smiled, thinking about the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The ceremony itself was a wonder to behold. The great temple had been decorated with flowers from both worlds, earth roses, that had somehow survived in the ship's emergency greenhouse, and Zerathian crystal blooms that rang like bells in the wind. Representatives from dozens of different planets had come to witness this historic union. As Chen and Zera exchanged vows, their words were translated into multiple languages and broadcast across the galaxy. They promised not just to love and honor each other, but to serve as bridges between their peoples and to work toward a future where differences were celebrated rather than feared. The moment that truly amazed everyone came during the traditional Zerathian bonding ceremony, when Chen and Zera joined hands. Their psychic connection blazed so brightly that even non-telepathic observers could see the energy flowing between them. It was proof that love could transcend not just cultural boundaries, but biological ones as well. Emperor Vex, watching his daughter's face glow with happiness, finally understood that he had been wrong to value bloodlines over character. This human had brought out the best in Zera, and together they represented hope for a dying world. 6 months after the wedding, the changes were remarkable. The human Zerathian cultural exchange that Chen and Zera had established was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. The program brought together scientists, artists, teachers, and ordinary citizens from both worlds to share knowledge and build friendships. The medical breakthrough came first. Human doctors, working with Zerathian healers, discovered that the fertility problems plaguing the Zerathian people were caused by an environmental toxin that human bodies could neutralize. Within weeks, they had developed a treatment that restored hope to countless families. The technological advances followed quickly. Human creativity combined with Zerathian engineering produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. They developed new forms of clean energy, revolutionary medical treatments, and even methods for terraforming dead planets to create new homes for both species. But perhaps the most important change was in how people thought about differences. Children from both worlds began learning each other's languages and customs. Mixed marriages became more common, and the old prejudices started to fade away. Chen and Zera worked tirelessly as ambassadors, traveling between worlds and helping to establish trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. Their love story had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. The biggest surprise came on a quiet evening 8 months after their wedding. Zara was feeling unusually tired and had been experiencing strange symptoms. When the palace doctors examined her, they delivered news that shocked everyone. "Congratulations, Your Highness," the chief physician said with a smile. "You're going to have a baby." Zara stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. I was told I could never. Human genetics work differently than ours," the doctor explained. "The combination has created something entirely new. Your child will be the first true hybrid of our species." When Chen arrived at the medical bay, Zara was crying tears of joy. For years, she had believed herself broken, worthless because she couldn't fulfill what her society saw as her primary purpose. Now she was carrying a child who would represent the future of both their peoples. "The prophecy," she whispered as Chen held her close. "The oracle said my salvation would come from distant Earth where red blood flows true. But it wasn't just about you finding me. It was about us creating something new together." The pregnancy was closely monitored by doctors from both worlds. Everyone wanted to understand how this miracle was possible. They discovered that hybrid children would inherit the best traits of both species. Human adaptability and creativity combined with Zorathian psychic abilities and long lifespan. Princess Velana, now close advisor to her sister, helped protect the growing hybrid community from extremists on both sides who feared change. She had become one of their strongest advocates, working to ensure that mixed families would be welcomed and protected. As Zara's pregnancy progressed, more hybrid children were born to other human Zorathian couples. Each birth was celebrated as a symbol of hope and unity. The children were healthy, intelligent, and possessed abilities that amazed scientists from both worlds. The day their daughter was born, Chen and Zara stood together at the same window where this story had begun. But now, instead of looking out at a dying world, they saw a thriving city where humans and Zorathians worked side by side. Their baby girl had the silver hair of Zorathian royalty, but the warm brown eyes of her human father. When she opened those eyes for the first time, both parents felt a telepathic connection that was stronger and clearer than anything they had experienced before. "What should we name her?" Chen asked softly. Zara smiled, remembering the oracle's words that had started this incredible journey. "Hope," she said simply. Her name should be Hope. As they watched their daughter sleep, ships from dozens of different worlds came and went from the spaceport below. The isolation that had nearly destroyed the Zorathian people was over. In its place was a new era of cooperation and mutual support. The little girl who had once been called Void Blessed and scorned for her inability to bear children had become the mother of a new generation. Her love for a human soldier had not only saved her own life, but had opened the door to a future neither species could have imagined alone. Years later, when Hope and her hybrid siblings were old enough to understand, Zara would tell them about the night she stood at this same window, feeling worthless and alone. She would explain how sometimes what seems like a curse is actually preparation for a blessing you never saw coming. But for now, she simply held her husband's hand and watched their daughter sleep, knowing that their love had literally changed. To worlds, the princess who was scorned had become the mother of the future, and the human soldier who asked for her hand had found his true home among the stars. The morning of the first trial arrived with dark clouds covering both suns. Chen stood in the center of the great arena, looking up at thousands of Zorathians who had come to watch this unprecedented event. Never before had an alien attempted their sacred trials, and the excitement in the air was electric. Zara sat in the royal box beside her father, trying to look calm while her heart raced. She had spent the last 3 nights secretly training with Chen, teaching him basic combat moves and sharing what she knew about Zorathian fighting styles. But she knew it might not be enough. Princess Velana sat nearby, her expression cold and calculating. She had been strangely quiet about her sister's proposal, which worried Zara more than open opposition would have. Velana was smart and ambitious, and quiet usually meant she was planning something. The first trial was combat. Chen would face warrior Drex, one of their finest fighters. Drex was nearly twice Chen's size, with arms like tree trunks and skin that had turned dark blue from years of battle. He carried a traditional energy blade that hummed with deadly power. Chen held his own weapon awkwardly. The Zerathian blade was different from any Earth weapon, its weight and balance completely foreign to him, but as he looked up at Zera in the stands, he remembered her words from the night before. Don't try to fight like us, fight like you. The combat began with Drex charging forward like a massive bull. Chen barely dodged the first strike, the energy blade singing past his ear. The crowd gasped as he rolled away, using his smallest size and human agility to stay out of reach. For the first few minutes, it looked like Chen was simply running away. The crowd began to mutter with disappointment. Some called him a coward. But Zera watched carefully and saw what others missed. Chen wasn't just avoiding Drex's attacks. He was studying them, learning the warrior's patterns and timing. Drex grew. Frustrated with his inability to land a solid hit, he began swinging wilder, putting more power behind each strike but leaving himself open for longer periods. Chen waited patiently, like a hunter watching prey. Then something unexpected happened. As Chen dodged another massive swing, he suddenly stumbled and fell to one knee. His weapon clattered away, and Drex raised his blade for a finishing blow. The crowd held its breath, but in that moment of apparent defeat, Chen felt something strange. A voice in his mind, Zera's voice, whispered, "Get up, I'm with you." The telepathic connection that had been growing between them over their weeks of secret meetings suddenly blazed to life. Strength flowed through Chen's body, not his own but Zera's. Shared through their emotional bond, he rolled away from Drex's strike and came up with his weapon in hand. But now he moved differently, with a fluid grace that was part human strategy and part Zerathian instinct. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed something impossible, a psychic bond between two different species. Chen's movements became perfectly coordinated with Zera's unspoken guidance. When Drex struck high, Chen knew to duck low. When the warrior left his side exposed, Chen was already moving to exploit it. The final moment came when Drex, exhausted and confused by this new development, made one last desperate charge. Chen sidestepped at exactly the right moment and used Drex's own momentum to send him crashing into the arena wall. The mighty warrior lay unconscious, defeated not by superior strength, but by superior strategy. The arena erupted in shocked cheers. Elder Vex looked like he had swallowed something bitter, while Emperor Vex stared at his daughter with new understanding. The psychic bond she had formed with the human was unprecedented in their history. But the trials were far from over. 3 days later, Chen faced the trial of wisdom. He was led into an ancient chamber filled with crystals that hummed with mysterious energy. In the center sat a puzzle that had stumped Zerathian scholars for over 300 years, the Sphere of Eternal Questions. The sphere was covered in symbols that shifted and changed as you looked at them, according to legend. Solving it required perfect understanding of Zerathian philosophy and mathematics. Dozens of their greatest minds had tried and failed. Chen studied the sphere for hours while a panel of elders watched. He tried mathematical approaches, pattern recognition, even artistic interpretation. Nothing worked. The symbols continued their maddening dance, always just beyond comprehension. As the sun began to set, Chen realized something important. Every approach he had tried was based on Zerathian thinking, complex, layered, focused on finding the one perfect answer. But what if the puzzle wasn't meant to be solved by Zerathian minds? He thought about his conversations with Zera, about how different human and Zerathian cultures were. Humans valued collaboration, asking for help, admitting when they didn't know something. Zerathians prized individual achievement and never showing weakness. Chen stood up and addressed the panel of elders. Honored ones, I believe this puzzle cannot be solved by one person alone. Elder Kara frowned. That is not how the trial of wisdom works. Human, you must find the answer yourself. But what if that's exactly the point? Chen replied. What if the greatest wisdom is knowing when you need help? On my world, we have a saying, no one is as smart as all of us together. He gestured to the sphere. This puzzle has remained unsolved for centuries because everyone approaches it alone. But what if it's designed to teach humility? What if the answer is that some challenges require cooperation? The elders looked at each other uncertainly. Chen's interpretation was radically different from anything they had considered. If I may. Chen continued, I'd like to request assistance from Princess Zara and any other scholars willing to help. Not because I'm weak, but because I believe strength comes from knowing when to ask for support. The request caused heated debate among the elders. Never before had anyone asked for help during the trials, but Chen's argument was compelling. Perhaps true wisdom lay not in isolated brilliance, but in collaborative understanding. Finally, they agreed to allow it. Zara joined Chen in the chamber, along with 3 elderly scholars, working together, combining human creativity with Zarathian knowledge. They approached the sphere from multiple angles simultaneously. The breakthrough came when they realized the symbols weren't meant to be read individually, but as part of a larger conversation between different voices. Each person contributed their unique perspective, and slowly, the sphere began to respond. When it finally opened, revealing its inner light, the elders sat in stunned silence. The human had not only solved their ancient puzzle, but had shown them a completely new way of thinking about wisdom itself. But Velana wasn't finished with her schemes. On the night before the final trial, she visited Chen in his preparation chamber. She brought him special food, claiming it was a traditional meal to give strength before the trial of sacrifice. My sister speaks highly of you, Velana said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to wish you luck personally. Chen thanked her politely and ate the food, not knowing it contained a subtle poison, not enough to kill him, but enough to weaken him at the crucial moment. The trial of sacrifice was the most difficult of all. It required the candidate to give up what they valued most for the good of someone else. Most who attempted it failed because they tried to sacrifice things they could afford to lose. Chen was brought to the medical wing of the palace, where a young Zarathian child lay dying from a rare blood disease. The doctors explained that only a very specific type of blood could save her blood. That was extremely rare among Zarathians, but common among humans. The trial is simple. Elder Vex explained, save this child, and you pass. But know that giving your blood will create a permanent bond between you and our world. You will never be able to return to your home planet. The biological changes are irreversible. Chen looked down at the sick child, barely 6 years old. Her blue skin pale, and her breathing shallow. In her face, he saw every child he had ever known on Earth, his nephew, his neighbor's kids, the young cadets he had trained. The poison Velana had given him was starting to take effect. He felt dizzy and weak, but his resolve only grew stronger. This wasn't just about saving one child or passing a trial. This was about proving that love could transcend species. That sacrifice meant giving up what you truly couldn't bear to lose. Except, he said simply as the doctors prepared for the transfusion. Chen's thoughts went to his family on Earth, his parents, who had raised him to believe in doing what was right no matter the cost. His sister, who had always been proud of his service. He would never see them again, never return to the blue skies and green fields of his home world. But as he looked at Zara, who stood beside him with tears in her eyes, he knew he was making the right choice. He was giving up his past to build a future, not just for himself and Zara, but for the bridge their union could create between two worlds. The transfusion saved the child's life and completed Chen's trials. As the little girl's color returned and her breathing steadied, the watching crowd erupted in celebration. Even Elder Vex seemed moved by what he had witnessed. But the true test was just beginning. Chen had proven himself worthy by Zarathian standards. But now he and Zara would have to navigate the complex politics of an interspecies marriage and the challenges of building something entirely new. Zara's hands shook as she read the official decree. Her father's seal gleamed at the bottom of the document, making it impossible to deny what she was seeing. In 3 days, all human prisoners would be executed as spies and threats to the Empire. She had been secretly visiting Captain Chen for 2 weeks now, always disguised as a translator. Their conversations had opened her eyes to a completely different way of thinking about life, relationships, and what really mattered. Now, just when she was beginning to understand the prophecy about salvation from distant Earth, that salvation was about to be destroyed, the worst part was the timing. She had only 12 days left before her own exile would begin. 12 days to find a husband who would accept her condition, or lose everything she had ever known. The irony was crushing. She had finally found someone who made her feel valued and understood, but he was scheduled to die before she could even tell him how she felt. That night, Zara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, her blue skin shifting to deep purple with anxiety. Every solution she thought of seemed impossible. She could try to help Chen escape, but where would he go? Her planet was surrounded by hostile space, and his ship was destroyed. Even if he survived, she would still face exile, and they would be separated forever. By morning, she had made a decision that would shock everyone, including herself. The Council of Elders met in the Great Crystal Chamber, where light from the twin suns created rainbow patterns on the walls. Zara had never been allowed to address them directly before. Princesses were expected to be seen, but not heard. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Emperor Vex looked surprised when his daughter entered the chamber. Zara, what are you doing here? This is not the place for father, honored elders, she interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. I come before you with a proposal that could change the fate of our empire. The 12 elders, ancient beings whose skin had turned silver with age, looked at her with mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Elder Vex, the most traditional of them all, spoke first. Princess, you forget your place. This council deals with matters of state, not the concerns of young women who have failed in their primary duty. The words stung, but Zara had expected them. She had spent years hearing similar dismissals. Today, however, she refused to be silenced. My failure, as you call it, has given me a unique perspective, she replied calmly. And I believe that perspective might save not just my own future, but the future of our entire species. Emperor Vex leaned forward in his throne. Despite everything, she was still his daughter, and he could see the determination in her eyes. Speak your proposal. Zara took a deep breath. Everything depended on the next few minutes. I wished to take the human captain as my husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the chamber erupted in outraged voices. Several elders stood up, shouting about disgrace and impossibility. Elder Vex's skin turned bright red with anger. This is madness, he declared. A union with an alien? It goes against every tradition, every law of our people. But Zara was ready for their objections. She had spent all night preparing her arguments. Our traditions are killing us, she said firmly. We cling to old ways while our population dies. We value bloodlines over character, genetics over wisdom. But what if there's another way? She gestured toward the great windows that showed their beautiful but dying city. Look around you. Our hospitals are empty of children's laughter. Our schools close one by one. We're so focused on preserving what we've always done that we're forgetting to actually survive. Elder Kara, one of the few women on the council, seemed intrigued despite herself. What exactly are you proposing, child? The human captain has qualities our people desperately need, Zara explained. He adapts to impossible situations. He shows kindness to enemies. He thinks of solutions where we see only problems if we're going to survive as a species. We need to learn from other civilizations, not destroy them. But the genetic incompatibility, another elder began, is exactly why this matters, Zara interrupted. I cannot bear Zarathian children. This has made me worthless in your eyes. But what if my value lies somewhere else? What if I could bridge two worlds, create understanding between species, open doors that have been closed for centuries? Emperor Vex studied his daughter carefully. In her passionate speech, he glimpsed the leader she could have been if circumstances were different. And what does the human say about this proposal? I haven't told him yet, Zara admitted, but I've spent time with him. I've learned about his culture, his values. He believes in partnerships based on respect and mutual support, not just biological compatibility. The debate that followed was fierce. Some elders called her proposal impossible. Others called it insulting to their ancestors. But a few began to see the logic in her argument. Their empire was indeed dying, and traditional approaches weren't working. Finally, Elder Vex posed the crucial question. Even if we considered this madness, how would you prove the human is worthy of a princess? He may have good qualities, but he's still a primitive alien. Zara had hoped someone would ask this. Let him undergo the 3 trials, she said. If he passes, it proves he's worthy by our own standards. If he fails, she swallowed hard. If he fails, I'll accept exile without further argument. The 3 trials hadn't been used in over a century. They tested combat skill, wisdom, and sacrifice, the 3 qualities most valued in Zarathian culture. No outsider had ever attempted them, and few Zarathians had passed all 3. Emperor Vex found himself in an impossible position. His daughter was offering him a way to solve multiple problems at once: her unmarried status, the human prisoner situation, and possibly even their diplomatic isolation. But the risks were enormous. If we allow this, he said slowly, and the human fails, both of you will be exiled together. You understand this? I understand, Father. And if he succeeds, you're willing to spend your life married to an alien, possibly forever cut off from human contact. Zara thought of Chen's gentle eyes and his stories about a world where people valued each other for who they were, not what they could produce. Yes, Father, I am. The council debated for hours while Zara waited outside the chamber. When they finally called her back in, her father's expression was unreadable. The council has decided, Emperor Vex announced. We will allow the human to attempt the 3 trials, but there are conditions. He has only 5 days to prepare. He must undertake the trials with no assistance, and if he fails even 1 trial, both of you will be banished immediately. Zara felt her knees go weak with relief and terror. She had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. That evening, she made her way to the prison for what might be the last time. Chen was sitting quietly, as always, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The guards had probably told the prisoners about their upcoming execution. Captain, she said softly, dropping her disguise for the first time, my name is Princess Zara, and I need to ask you something that will sound completely insane. Chen looked up at her, taking in her royal robes and the circlet on her head. His eyes widened as he realized who had been visiting him all these nights, a princess. He said quietly, I wondered why you seemed different from the others. I've made a proposal to save your life, she continued quickly, but it involves marrying me and undertaking 3 trials. That could very well result in your death anyway. Chen was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since his capture. Princess Zara, he said formally, before I answer, may I ask you something? She nodded. Double quotes, why? Why risk everything for a stranger from another world? Zara looked into his kind eyes and saw her future, uncertain, dangerous, but filled with possibilities she had never imagined. Because you showed me that there's more than one way to be valuable, she said simply, and because I think we could build something together that neither of our worlds has seen before. Chen stood up and approached the energy barrier. Then, I accept your proposal, Princess. Let's see if this human can prove himself worthy of a Zarathian royal. As their hands touched the barrier from opposite sides, Zara felt a spark of hope that had nothing to do with prophecies or bloodlines. Whatever happened in the trials, they would face it together. The real challenge was just beginning. Captain Chen woke up with a splitting headache and the taste of metal in his mouth. His vision was blurry, and everything hurt. Slowly, the world came into focus, and he realized he was lying on a cold stone floor in what looked like a prison cell. The walls around him were made of some kind of smooth, dark material he had never seen before. Strange symbols glowed softly along the edges, pulsing like a heartbeat. This definitely wasn't Earth. He sat up carefully, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. His uniform was torn and dirty, but he was alive. That was more than he could say. For most of his crew, the memory of the crash came flooding back. Their peaceful mission to make first contact with an alien civilization had gone terribly wrong. When their ship was shot down over what looked like a beautiful crystal city, Chen looked around his cell. Two other survivors from his crew were there: Rodriguez, his communications officer, and Park, their navigator. Both were unconscious but breathing. At least he wasn't completely alone in this strange place. The cell door was unlike anything he had ever seen. It seemed to be made of pure energy, shimmering like water, but solid as steel. Beyond it, he could see a long corridor with more of those glowing symbols on the walls. As the hours passed, Chen tried to make sense of their situation. The beings who had captured them were clearly advanced. Their technology was far beyond anything Earth had achieved. Their captors had blue skin that seemed to shift colors slightly, and their eyes were larger than human eyes, a deep purple color that seemed to look right through him. When the guards came to check on them, Chen noticed something interesting. They moved with military precision, but they also seemed to communicate without speaking, tilting their heads and making subtle gestures. It reminded him of his own soldiers back home. The way they could work together without words after years of training. He decided to try something. When one of the guards approached, Chen stood up straight and gave a respectful nod, the kind of acknowledgement one soldier gives another. The guard paused, surprised. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Chen thought he saw a flicker of recognition there. From that point on, Chen made it his mission to observe and learn. He watched the guards' routines, picked up on their patterns, and started to understand some of their basic gestures. When they brought food, a strange but nutritious paste, he said thank you in what he hoped was a respectful tone. The guards seemed puzzled but not hostile. Rodriguez and Park, when they finally woke up, were not handling captivity as well. Rodriguez kept demanding to know where they were and shouting at the guards. Park had retreated into himself, sitting in the corner, and barely speaking. Chen understood their fear, but he knew that making enemies wouldn't help them survive. On the third day, something unexpected happened. Chen was doing push-ups in his cell, partly to stay in shape, partly to keep his mind occupied, when he noticed someone watching from the shadows beyond the energy door. It wasn't one of the regular guards. This figure was smaller, more delicate, wearing a dark cloak that hid most of their features. They stood very still, as if trying not to be seen. Chen pretended not to notice at first, but when he finished his exercise, he looked directly at the mysterious watcher. The figure stepped back quickly, but Chen caught a glimpse of those large purple eyes. Something about them was different from the guards, sadder, more curious. The watcher disappeared before he could see more. The next day, the mysterious figure returned. This time, Chen was sitting quietly, using techniques his grandmother had taught him to stay calm in stressful situations. Meditation wasn't something he talked about much with his fellow soldiers, but it had helped him through many difficult missions. The watcher seemed fascinated by his stillness. Chen could feel eyes on him, studying his every move. When he opened his eyes and looked toward the corridor, the figure didn't run away this time. Instead, they tilted their head, as if trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Chen slowly reached for his small water ration. The guards gave each prisoner just enough to survive. As he lifted it to drink, he noticed the watcher lean forward slightly. On impulse, he made a decision that would change everything. He stood up and walked to the energy door. The figure tensed, ready to flee. But Chen simply placed his water container on the floor and pushed it as close to the door as he could get it. Then he stepped back and gestured toward it, a universal sign of offering. The watcher stared at the container, then at Chen, clearly shocked. In their world, Chen would later learn, prisoners were considered the lowest form of life. The idea that one would offer their precious water to someone else, especially someone they thought was just a servant, was unthinkable. But Chen didn't know any of this. He just saw someone who seemed thirsty and tired, and his instinct was to help. It was something his parents had taught him. Kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything to the person who receives it. The mysterious watcher stood frozen for several long moments. Then, slowly, they approached the energy door, with a gesture Chen didn't understand. The door shimmered and became permeable for just a moment. A delicate blue hand reached through and took the water container. Chen watched as the figure removed their hood slightly and took a small sip. In the dim light, he caught his first clear glimpse of their face. It was definitely female, with features that were both alien and strangely beautiful. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They held a deep sadness that reminded him of soldiers who had seen too much war. She looked at him with something like wonder, as if she had never seen such a simple act of kindness before. Then she carefully placed the container back through the door and disappeared into the shadows. That night, Chen lay on his stone bed thinking about the encounter. Who was she? Why was she watching them? And why had such a small gesture seemed to surprise her so much? He didn't know it yet, but his mysterious watcher was having similar thoughts. Princess Zara had returned to her room with her mind spinning. In all her years of royal life, surrounded by politics and scheming, no one had ever offered her something they needed for themselves. This strange alien, this prisoner who had every reason to hate her people, had given her his water simply because he thought she might need it. Over the following days, the visits continued. Zara would come disguised as a translator, a role she had convinced the guards she was fulfilling to better understand the prisoners. Each time, she found herself more intrigued by the human captain, and like his companions, who grew more desperate and angry with each passing day, Chen remained calm and dignified. He never shouted at the guards or made demands. Instead, he watched, learned, and treated everyone with respect, even his captors. Through careful observation, Zara began to understand that this was no ordinary soldier. Chen had a sharp mind that was constantly working, analyzing patterns, and looking for opportunities. But more than that, he had something her people seemed to have lost in their desperation to survive. He had hope. During one of their silent encounters, Chen began to speak softly. Not knowing if she could understand him, he talked about his home, about Earth and its blue skies and vast oceans. He spoke about his family, his mission of peace, and his belief that different peoples could learn from each other instead of fighting. Zara found herself returning night after night, drawn by his stories and his gentle manner. Through the prison's translation system, she began to understand his words, and they painted a picture of a world very different from hers. On Earth, Chen told her, people were valued for who they were, not just what they could provide. Families were built on love and choice, not obligation and bloodlines. It was a radical concept for someone who had grown up believing that her worth was tied entirely to her ability to bear children. As the days passed, Zara realized that the ancient prophecy was beginning to make sense. This human, with his red blood and kind heart, represented something her world had forgotten, that true strength comes not from what you can give to others, but from how you choose to treat them. She didn't know that in just a few days, her father would announce the execution of all human prisoners, forcing her to make the most important decision of her life. But already, something had changed in her heart. This strange visitor from a distant Earth had shown her a different way to live, and she would never be the same. Princess Zara stood by her tall window, looking out at the beautiful night sky. The bright moons hung above her home city, casting a soft blue glow on the crystal buildings below. Everything looked peaceful, but her heart felt heavy with sadness. At 25 years old, Zara should have been married long ago. In her world, the planet Zereth, getting married and having children was the most important thing anyone could do. Her people, the Zerathians, had shimmering blue skin that changed colors with their emotions, and they could read each other's thoughts. But their planet was dying, and babies were becoming more and more rare. Zara touched her stomach gently. The doctors had told her the terrible news years ago. She could never have children. In a world where having babies meant everything, she was considered broken, worthless, a disappointment to her royal family. Tonight was especially hard. Her younger sister Valana had just announced at the royal dinner that she was expecting her third baby. The entire palace had erupted in celebration. People cheered. Musicians played happy songs, and gifts poured in from across the kingdom. The land glowed with pride as everyone praised her. But Zara sat alone at the long royal table, feeling invisible, even though she was a princess, even though she was smart and kind and brave. Nobody seemed to see her anymore. They whispered behind her back, calling her void blessed, a cruel name for people who couldn't have children. The worst part wasn't the whispers or the loneliness. It was the look in her father's eyes. Emperor Thex, the most powerful ruler in their galaxy, couldn't even look at his oldest daughter anymore. She had failed at the one thing that mattered most. As the celebration continued without her, Zara quietly slipped away from the feast. Her footsteps echoed in the empty marble hallways as she walked back to her room. Even her own guards seemed embarrassed to be protecting her. She heard them talking in low voices as she passed. Poor thing. One guard whispered, "What use is a princess who can't continue the royal line?" "I heard the emperor is thinking of sending her away," another replied. "Maybe to one of the mining colonies, where she can't embarrass the family anymore." Zara's heart sank even deeper. She had suspected this might happen, but hearing it confirmed made it real. She was going to lose everything: her home, her title, her family, her entire life. Back in her room, Zara collapsed onto her bed and let the tears flow. Her room was beautiful, filled with rare crystals and silk curtains, but it felt like a prison. What good were all these fancy things if she was completely alone? She thought about her childhood, when things were different. Back then, her father would lift her up and spin her around, calling her his little star. Her mother, before she died in the Great War, used to brush Zara's long silver hair and tell her stories about brave princesses who saved their kingdoms. But those days were gone. Now she was just a burden, a reminder of what their royal family couldn't do. The pressure to have children had only gotten worse as their people faced extinction. Every empty cradle was a step closer to the end of their civilization. Zara walked to her mirror and stared at her reflection. Her blue skin had turned a dull gray color, the shade of sadness and despair. Her large purple eyes, once bright with hope, now looked tired and defeated. She barely recognized herself anymore. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Princess." Came a gentle voice. It was Kira, her oldest and most loyal servant. "Your father wishes to see you in his private study." Zara's stomach twisted. With fear, this was it. This was when he would officially cast her out, strip her of her title, and send her into exile. She took a deep breath and followed Kira through the winding palace corridors. Emperor Thex sat behind his massive desk, looking older than she remembered. The weight of ruling a dying world showed in every line on his face. He didn't look up when she entered, just kept staring at the papers in front of him. "Sit down, Zara," he said quietly. She sat in the chair across from him, trying to stay brave. Whatever he was about to say, she would face it with dignity. "The Council of Elders met today," he began, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They have made a decision about your future." Zara's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand. Father, you have 1 month," he continued. "1 lunar cycle to find a suitable mate who will accept your condition. If you cannot, the council has voted to send you to the outer colonies permanently." The words hit her like a physical blow. 1 month to find someone willing to marry a princess who couldn't give them children. It seemed impossible. Who would want her? "I know this is difficult," her father said, finally looking at her. For just a moment, she saw a flash of the man who used to call her his little star. But perhaps there is still hope. Perhaps there is someone out there who will see your other qualities. After leaving her father's study, Zara wandered the palace halls like a ghost. 1 month, 30 days to change her entire fate. She thought about all the eligible bachelors in their kingdom, nobles, warriors, merchants, but she knew the truth. None of them would want a wife who couldn't give them heirs. That night, unable to sleep, Zara made a desperate decision. She wrapped a dark cloak around herself and snuck out of the palace. If the traditional paths had failed her, maybe it was time to try something different. The shrine of ancient mothers stood on a hill outside the city. It was an old, mysterious place where people came to pray for fertility and guidance. Legend said that the first mothers of their race were buried there, and their spirits still watched over their people. Zara climbed the stone steps in the moonlight, her heart pounding with hope and fear. Inside the shrine, an old priestess sat. In meditation, her eyes were clouded with age, but they seemed to see everything. "I know why you have come, child," the priestess said without opening her eyes. "You seek what cannot be given. Please," Zara whispered, falling to her knees. "There must be something, some blessing, some miracle. I don't want to lose everything." The old woman was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke in a voice that seemed to come from another world. "Your salvation lies not in stars of blue, but in the distant earth where red blood flows true." Zara frowned. Red blood. All Zarathians had blue blood, like the color of their skin. What could this riddle mean? "I don't understand," she said. But when she looked up, the priestess had vanished, leaving only the scent of ancient flowers in the air. Walking back to the palace in the pre-dawn darkness, Zara felt more confused than ever. Red blood, distant earth, the words echoed in her mind, but their meaning remained a mystery. She had come seeking answers and found only more. Questions died as the first sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Zara stood once again at her window. 29 days left. The countdown to her exile had begun. But deep in her heart, something had changed. The priestess's words had planted a seed of hope, however small. Maybe, just maybe, her salvation would come from somewhere she had never expected. Maybe her story wasn't over yet. She didn't know that far across the galaxy, a small ship from a planet called Earth was about to crash land in her world, carrying with it the answer to the ancient prophecy and the key to her future.